It all started with a letter from the HOA, a single sheet of paper that turned my quiet suburban life into a battle of wills. They claimed my fence was 2 inches too tall, a violation of their precious rules, and demanded I tear it down. But I wasn't about to let a group of nosy busybodies dictate my property. What followed was a calculated, satisfying plan to make them regret ever sending that letter. If you love a good story of standing up to overreaching HOAs, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more epic neighborhood drama. Let's dive into how I turned the tables on my HOA and came out on top. The morning sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns of Willow Creek, a suburban enclave where every blade of grass seemed to bow to the Homeowners Association's rulebook. I'd lived here for 3 years, a single dad with a modest 2-story home, a backyard for my kids to play in, and a newly built wooden fence that gave us a sliver of privacy. The fence was my pride, a 6-foot structure of cedar planks I'd spent weeks measuring, cutting, and staining to perfection. It was a shield from the world, a sanctuary for my family. But the HOA saw it differently. Their letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked into my mailbox like a venomous snake coiled in wait. The complaint was absurd. My fence, they claimed, exceeded the maximum height of 6 feet by a measly 2 inches. They demanded I lower it or face fines, legal action, or even forced removal. I stood in my driveway, letter in hand, staring at the fence that looked flawless to me. 2 inches? I'd measured it meticulously. The audacity of their complaint ignited a spark of defiance in me. I wasn't some pushover who'd bow to their whims. I grabbed a tape measure and checked every post. The fence was exactly 6 feet at every point. Their accusation was baseless, a power trip from a board of self-appointed neighborhood overlords. I decided then and there to fight back, not by tearing down my fence, but by outsmarting them. I spent the evening poring over the HOA's bylaws, a dense document filled with jargon about setbacks, easements, and aesthetic standards. Buried in the fine print was a clause about measurement disputes. Any homeowner could request an independent survey to verify compliance. The catch? The HOA would cover the cost if their claim was wrong. I smirked, sensing an opportunity. The next day I submitted a formal request for a survey, citing the clause and attaching photos of my fence with a tape measure clearly showing 6 feet. The HOA's response was swift and smug, agreeing to the survey but warning that I'd pay if I was wrong. I wasn't worried. I knew my measurements were precise. The surveyor arrived a week later, a no-nonsense man in a polo shirt who spent an hour measuring every inch of my fence with laser precision. His report was unequivocal. The fence was 6 feet, not a fraction more. The HOA's claim was false. I expected an apology, maybe a grudging acknowledgement of their mistake. Instead, they doubled down. A new letter arrived, this time citing a vague aesthetic violation for the fence's stain color, claiming it didn't match the neighborhood's approved palette. I stood in my backyard staring at the rich, warm cedar tone I'd chosen and felt my blood boil. They weren't just wrong, they were relentless. I wasn't about to repaint my fence to satisfy their whims. I dug deeper into the bylaws, searching for another way to turn their rules against them. That's when I found it. A clause allowing homeowners to propose amendments to the covenants at the annual meeting, provided they gathered enough signatures. If I could rally enough neighbors, I could change the rules themselves. The HOA had overplayed their hand, and I was ready to call their bluff. But first I needed allies, and that meant stepping into the messy world of neighborhood politics. The annual meeting was 2 months away, and I had work to do. The neighborhood of Willow Creek was a patchwork of personalities, from retirees who treated their lawns like sacred ground, to young families too busy to care about HOA drama. My first task was to identify who might back me. I started with my immediate neighbors, people I'd waved to but never really known. The couple next door, the Hendersons, were in their 60s and had lived in Willow Creek since its first homes were built. They'd grumbled about the HOA's nitpicking before, so I figured they'd be an easy start. I brought over a copy of the surveyor's report and explained the HOA's latest move with the color violation. Their outrage mirrored mine. They'd once been fined for planting unapproved shrubs. Emboldened, I moved on to others. The young family across the street, the Patels, were skeptical at first, wary of rocking the boat. But when I showed them the HOA's pattern of frivolous complaints, including a warning they'd received about their kid's basketball hoop, they were in. Word spread, and soon I was knocking on doors, sharing my story, and collecting signatures for a petition to amend the fence height and color rules. It wasn't easy. Some neighbors were indifferent, others loyal to the HOA board. A clique led by Margaret, a retired accountant with a penchant for control. She'd been president for years, her sharp eyes scanning the neighborhood for the slightest infraction. I avoided her street, knowing she'd catch wind of my campaign soon enough. By the end of the month, I had 40 signatures, enough to force a vote at the annual meeting. But signatures weren't enough. I needed a strategy to win over the room. I spent nights crafting a presentation, complete with photos of my fence, the surveyor's report, and a timeline of the HOA's escalating demands. I highlighted how their rules stifled individuality, how their enforcement was inconsistent, targeting some while sparing others. I even dug up records showing Margaret's own backyard pergola violated setback rules, a fact I planned to use if she pushed back too hard. As the meeting approached, tension hung over Willow Creek like a storm cloud. Margaret and her board sent emails urging residents to uphold the community standards that kept property values high. I countered with flyers, slipped into mailboxes under the cover of night, outlining my case and urging neighbors to question the HOA's overreach. The night of the meeting arrived, a packed community center buzzing with anticipation. I stood at the front, projector ready, heart pounding. Margaret sat in the first row, her lips pursed, her allies whispering around her. I presented my case, calm but firm, laying out the facts and appealing to fairness. When I proposed amending the bylaws to allow 6-foot 2-inch fences and a broader color palette, the room erupted in murmurs. Margaret stood, her voice cutting through the noise, claiming my amendment would destroy the neighborhood's charm. I was ready. I projected the photo of her pergola, pointing out its violation. The room gasped. She sputtered, caught off guard, but the damage was done. The vote was close, but my amendment passed by a slim margin. I'd won this round, but Margaret's glare told me the fight wasn't over. The HOA had to rewrite its rules, but they weren't about to let me off easy. With the bylaws amended, I thought the saga of my fence would end. My victory at the meeting had forced the HOA to drop their complaints about height and color, and for a moment I felt untouchable. My fence stood proud, a symbol of defiance against petty tyranny. But Margaret and her board weren't done. A week after the meeting, a new letter arrived, this time citing a maintenance violation. They claimed my fence had a loose board, a danger to the neighborhood's safety. I inspected every inch of the structure. Not a single board was loose. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I could have ignored it, let them stew in their defeat, but I wasn't about to let them harass me indefinitely. I decided to escalate. The HOA's own rules allowed for an appeal process, including a hearing before the board. I requested one immediately, attaching photos of my pristine fence and a letter demanding they cease their baseless complaints. The hearing was set for a month later, giving me time to prepare. I didn't stop at the appeal. I started researching Margaret's history with the HOA, digging through public records and old meeting minutes. What I found was gold. Years of complaints from other residents about her heavy-handed tactics, including a failed lawsuit from a homeowner she'd fined for an unapproved mailbox. I reached out to that homeowner, a lawyer named Tom who'd since moved away. He was happy to share his story, even offering to draft a cease and desist letter if it came to that. Armed with this, I rallied my allies again, this time to push for a bigger change, removing Margaret from the board. The bylaws allowed for a recall vote if enough residents petitioned. I hit the pavement again, collecting signatures from those who'd supported me before and others fed up with the HOA's reign. The hearing arrived, a tense showdown in the community center. Margaret presided, her face a mask of forced neutrality. I presented my case, showing photos, the surveyor's report, and even Tom's old complaint to highlight her pattern of abuse. The board, clearly rattled, dismissed the maintenance violation but warned me to maintain community harmony. It was a hollow victory, but it bought me time. The recall petition gained traction, with 60 signatures by the end of the month. Margaret fought back, hosting a neighborhood unity barbecue to sway opinion, but her charm offensive fell flat. Too many had stories of her overreach. The recall vote was scheduled for a special meeting, and I could feel the tide turning. My fence was no longer just a fence, it was a rallying cry for change. The special meeting for the recall vote was electric, The community center packed with residents, some curious, others angry. Margaret took the stage, defending her tenure, claiming her strict enforcement had preserved property values. I countered with a list of her oversteps, from my fence to Tom's mailbox to the Patel's basketball hoop. I didn't just want her gone. I wanted the HOA to rethink its purpose. The vote was a landslide. Margaret was ousted and a new board was elected, including 2 of my allies, the Hendersons. The new board moved quickly, revising the enforcement process to require multiple complaints before action, and creating a mediation committee for disputes. My fence stood untouched, its cedar planks gleaming under the sun. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, as if a weight had lifted. I'd turned a 2-inch complaint into a revolution, proving that even the pettiest battles could spark real change. Months later, I sat in my backyard, my kids playing within the safe confines of that 6-foot fence, and smiled. The HOA had learned their lesson, and I'd made sure they'd never forget it. If you enjoyed this wild ride of HOA drama, smash that like button, subscribe, and share your own neighborhood stories in the comments. Hit the bell so you never miss an update on epic battles like this one. Stay tuned for more.